In the previous 3 videos, Dr. Tomlinson describes differentiation as a process that includes adopting a growth mindset, making personal connections with students, and fostering a caring learning community. In this video, Dr. Tomlinson will move from the theoretical to the practical, as she presents a number of differentiated instructional strategies for teaching reading and writing at various grade levels. And now, Dr.
Because there's
Tomlinson.
something for it to hang on to. I want to share with you one of my very favorite quotes from one of my very favorite writers that I think is a great challenge to all of us in literacy, whether you're in kindergarten, 5th grade, or 12th grade. She says, we are raising a generation of stoplight readers. And I would say stoplight writers too. We say to the kids, sound out this word for me. And then we say, tell me what the meaning of that word is in the sentence. Now read the sentence. Now read this next sentence. What's the first sound in this word? Find another word in the next sentence that has the same first sound. Tell me a rhyming word that this word goes with. And meantime, that was supposed to be a story that we just made chopped liver out of, right there. She says we're raising a generation of stoplight readers. Read a phrase and talk about it. Read a phrase and analyze a word. Read a phrase and tell me a sound in it. And she says, guys, if you want literate people, you can't make stoplight readers literate. What you really are trying to do is raise a generation of flashlight readers. Kids who are so excited about the book that they want to crawl under the bed and read it at night. Kids that are so excited about it that they want to put it inside their social studies book so they can keep reading the story that was too wonderful to quit. And once again, we've gotten such pressure on that stoplight business that we've forgotten about the flashlight part. That's another reason that your bring in the books thing is wonderful, because it spotlights the flashlight aspects of it. If we want literacy to really work, because we don't have any reason to think kids learn literacy differently than anything else, we can't take the meaning out of it. We just absolutely can't take the meaning out of it. Kids of any age, if they're going to learn to read, need a reason to read. And I don't think too many of them find a lot of reasons in sounding things out. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't have to learn to sound things out, but what I'm saying is there has to be time in there for the joy of reading too. And that sounding out has to be in service of something wonderful happening, not with that as the end product. They have to have time to read. And now sometimes we've got them doing so many stoplight things that there's no time just to sit and read, no time just to pick up a book and love it. They need something that's readable, in other words, something that's roughly in their challenge level. They need somebody to read and respond with. Middle school and high school, think about that. How many times do kids actually have conversations with each other about reading, or read together in small groups? I don't mean the whole class reading, but read together in small groups, or have a chance to sit with a teacher and read and talk about what they're reading. They need adult support and advocacy. Those of you in middle and high school, if they don't know how to read really well, you got to help them. You may not be a reading teacher, but they don't know how. And you know more than they do. So you've got some strategies that you can use to try to move them down the pike. The strategies that you'll learn about in this session tomorrow, and have seen a couple of yesterday, and the ones that you're learning about in other sessions, are helpful. But they can't replace these things. And a very important part of that is, why should I care to read this book? What does it matter to me? This is sort of the typical standardized test cartoon. The dog just went to the pharmacist to get his prescription filled, and the pharmacist says, have someone force one of these down your throat every 6 hours. And that's kind of how we're teaching reading. We just force one skill down after the other, after the other, after the other. And the stoplight factors in literacy are kind of gone. So our folks here would say to you, as we say to ourselves, we should not be teaching a unit or a lesson or a year without saying, here's the essential knowledge that kids have to have. Not everything they could learn, but the terms, the knowledge, the people, what it lists of things that they absolutely have to move on. And here are the skills that they have to to be able to continue to grow. Not every skill in the world, but the ones that are essential. But this is the killer piece. What's the point of this? What's the big idea? I want to tell you, for those of you who are beyond first and second grade, I think this is still a problem, by the way, in K1 and 2. I just think it gets worse after that. I have been several places recently where teachers were developing curriculum with a literacy focus. And they're trying really hard to get the big understandings. A big idea is something that's supposed to help with engagement. It sounds interesting. It sounds sort of like me. It sounds kind of like my life. It helps me make a connection. It should say to the kid, come here, this is going to be really cool. So I sit down with the teachers who are working very hard, and their understandings will be things like sounds blend together to make words. How many kids do you know that find that truly intriguing? Or authors use metaphors and similes and analogies to help readers understand their ideas. Middle school, are you excited now? Those understandings that I'm seeing develop more and more are understandings about skills. They're not understandings about that novel or that poem or life that it connects to. And I'm about to decide that what we're going to have to do in literature to make our literacy to make ourselves happy is to say, here's the knowledge, here are the skills, here are the understandings about the skills, and here are the understandings about the novel or the story or the poem. It's that set about the novels and the poem that make us want to be the flashlight readers. I think it's good for you to know those rules about literacy, and I don't think it hurts kids to talk about them, but I don't think that engages anybody, and I don't think it makes stoplight readers. So here's my question to myself. Why'd that author write that book? Do you think there are many authors who go to the typewriter or the computer every day and say, oh, this will be a swell book for them to pick apart and decode? They're writing that thing because they believe there's a lesson in there for a kid, because it's a mirror held up in front of a kid that the kid can see himself in. And we need to stick with the author's intent there. That's where the understanding comes from. That's where the will to read really comes from. It's that understanding piece, and we're missing a lot of it. Thoughts or questions there? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, I know within our county is so driven by we live in Maryland, and so it's called the voluntary state curriculum. But our teachers and everybody is so driven by that that's what we have to use in all of our planning. But what it really lacks are those understandings, because the state curriculum itself doesn't have the big understandings. It has the know and be able to do piece, and so the teachers don't, they look at it and they miss that whole understanding part. I don't know if other states have the understanding.
We tend to have one of two things in states, and you can't generalize completely, but if you were looking at the bulk of stuff, a lot of state standards are just lists of knowledge and skill. And then there are a few states where their standards are these really broad understandings, life is important. Okay, what do you do with that as a teacher? And we're lacking the balance, really. So the teachers in the states with those big, fuzzy understandings always say, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to hang on it. They're missing the knowledge and skill, and the rest of us are going around, this doesn't add up to anything because the understandings aren't there. And to make it worse, some states, and Virginia is one of them, will say in the set of standards, the students will understand that, and you think, ooh, an understanding's coming. Shakespeare was a famous writer. And it's not an understanding. They just said it that way. It has nothing to do with understanding anything. So we're really kind of left with our own devices there, y'all. Let me show you this as an example from a teacher of young children. The kids, she had just read to them Where the Wild Things Are. And they had some Wild Thing dolls, and they talked about, many of them had that read to them at home. But when they finished, here are the things that she asked them to discuss. Sometimes they discussed it with some of their friends, and sometimes they did it in small groups with her. So it wasn't that everybody was doing this all at the same time. But with some kids, she said, why did Max go to visit the wild things? Do you think that was a good idea or a bad idea? And why do you say that? And these are kids that are having difficulty with reading. It's hard for them yet. They haven't really latched on. But she didn't just say, who was Max? What time of day did he leave? What does this word mean? She's asking them for a judgment. Was it good that he went to see the wild things? Was it not so good? Why would you say that? What good things came out of that? What if it had been you? So she's expecting them to reason about the story and see some thought in it. For kids who are a little bit more advanced, she said, if you were Max's mom or dad, write about what you would think when he went to his room, when he went to where the wild things were, and when he decided to come home. It doesn't really tell you those segments exactly, but what she's saying is, gee guys, his thinking changed as the book went along. What would he be thinking at this point in the book, and how would his thinking change here? With kids who were a little bit more advanced, although this one's kind of a strange one I'll tell you about in a minute, Max sometimes talks to himself. Tell us what he said when he goes to his room, when he goes through his visit with the wild things, when he decides to come home, and when he returns to his room. What do he and his parents say the next day? Now, this seems unlikely for a primary student, but there are always kids in a class that are thinking so much more deeply than we can see. And if these are little kids that are advanced 3 or 4 years with reading, some of these little critters were all over this. What does it really mean to go where the wild things are? Write a story about a time when that happened to you or someone you know. Tell enough so we can see how that story and this story is alike. And what she's asking primary students to do there is to say, do you understand that this is a story about solving your problems in your imagination, and that your imagination can take you away from things and can help you see a better world? And those little primary kids were able to do that. We have a bad habit in education of bouncing from one extreme to another without realizing that the answer is usually all of the above. And here's what I think. This teacher does teach her kids sounds and to decode. And there are times where they have conversations just about, how does this word make sense in this sentence, and how did you know that? But what she tries to do there is to do that in settings that don't take away from the joy of the book. So you can do it with sentences that you have, or with paragraphs that you have, or crazy stories that you've made up that are little teeny things for kids, and then still have those times where they just get immersed in the wonder of the reading. Maybe then you pull one sentence out of that and put it on the board and talk with the kids about something that would help them, you know, sort of see how to work, or maybe you sit down after that and work with some small parts with kids. We keep having this silly argument about whether reading is about phonics or meaning, and I'm just real sorry you'll never learn to read with meaning if you can't read. And if all you can do is sound things out, who wants to read anyhow? So the challenge is really what you're saying, and where we're falling short is that we're investing we feel so compelled to do all of it in that decoding piece that we've forgotten about this other piece, and trying to understand how to meld those two is really, really critical. My argument for you is not that you don't teach kids to read, but that your differentiation needs to have plenty of room for the knowledge and skills as well as for the understanding, and then to show kids how those marry, how they come together. Yeah, and it's not that we should use one end of the continuum or the other, it's that we've forgotten that they go together. And so that means that when we differentiate, sure, you're going to need to do different skills for different kids at different times. They're in different places. But we can all come back together to discuss the understandings like this, and that helps build community. When I first started working in a differentiated classroom, I was really struggling because I had a bimodal class. It was 7th grade, and almost half of my students were 3 or 4 years or more below grade level in reading. And almost half of them were 3 or 4 or more years above grade level in reading. And I had almost nobody in the middle. So that notion of going in and teaching one thing to everybody was the stupidest thing I could do. I might catch 1 or 2 kids in a class and that would be it. And so then my inclination was just to sort of give everybody a set of skills to work with, and you work with the skills that you need, and I'll sit down and do that with you. But we never could become a community that way. We were just a bunch of isolated kids, people sitting at learning carrels, you know, doing stuff and never coming together. And so my first instinctive sense as a teacher was, I get it, they'll work with skills on a more independent level or in small groups of nests where kids have those needs, but we'll all come back together to talk about big ideas. I didn't think of calling them that. In my head, my terms were skills and content. Those were the two terms I used for myself. But had I had a vocabulary, I would have called it skills and big ideas or skills and understanding. And I think that's still the case. I think we still have to check out the kids' skills and help them kind of work where they are, but we still need to bring them back again around those understandings. Look at Harry Potter. Look at all those kids around the world who can't read in school and who have learning disabilities and who don't like to read and who have never read anything, that sit down with that book and read that darn sucker through despite the fact that it's bigger than a cinder block because it's exciting. And that's my point to you. When you're thinking about differentiation in literacy, work on those understandings, make that the centerpiece of what you're doing, and push the skills off of that and back into that, but don't make it just a rote skills-based kind of thing. I want you to look at this example as a secondary one. Again, this is kind of where you're coming from here. This actually came out of it didn't come straight out, but I lifted it out and played with it from a book by Richard Peck, whom those of you who teach on the secondary level probably know. He's written a lot of wonderful novels for middle and high school students. And he wrote a book about his writing called Past Perfect Present Tense. And in the foreword to that, he was talking about why he's excited about being a writer. Now there's my thing again. Why do writers write? They don't write because somebody said write a 5-paragraph essay. They don't write because somebody said it's Tuesday, therefore we should write a sonnet. They write because it's a revelation of life. So I was reading what Peck said in there, and it just occurred to me that these big ideas that he has would be the most wonderful ways to work with kids around all kinds of literature. And they're exciting. They're about us. They're about me. He said if I withdrew what he was saying, he would want the kids to know terms like fiction, change, and reader's role. That's a good one right here to get in some skills of literacy and awareness and what a good reader's mind does, but the reader's responsibility to bring his or her life to that piece and make some connections. Here are the understandings that I took out of his preface. Fiction is never an answer, it's always a question. So what is the question in this book? Why did somebody write Bridge to Terabithia? What's the point of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings? What's the question? Fiction is always about change. What's changing in here? And how are those changes like the changes in your life or your grandmother's life? In fiction, the reader asks, what if I were the character? What would I do? Is what the character did here an intelligent thing? How do you make that decision? How do you know if a decision you're making in your life is wise or unwise? Would you have made the same decision he made here? If it seems like a really shallow one to you, how do kids get lured into shallow decisions? Through good fiction, the reader asks, what motivates human beings to do what they do? What motivated the character in this book, or in this poem, or in this play? And what motivated you to do what you did yesterday? Do you ever have any of these experiences? Through good fiction, and I love this, readers try on lives to see which one fits. That's why people read books. We try on those lives just like we try on clothes and jackets to see if they fit. So which lives in this book fit you, and which ones are a crummy fit for you? Through good fiction, the epiphany is a sudden breakthrough of understanding, of self-awareness. The epiphany in a book is that you understand yourself better. So have you had an epiphany in this book? And fiction changes readers. Good fiction changes you. Has this changed you? Explain why or why not, and maybe we're on to critiquing the book then. And what he would want the kids to do is use the strategies of a successful reader, which means using context clues and headings and transitions and all sorts of word understandings, root words. And then in support or refute the unit's principles in a blog or a vlog. In other words, as we read this novel, keep a blog or a vlog or a journal where you offer proof and evidence that these things do hold up as big ideas or that they don't. I don't know how many of you went to a session that Jessica Hockett did yesterday, but she's a swell person. She's one of our students. She lives in Chicago now, but she sent me a note that a teacher emailed her in a school where Jessica had been doing some work recently, and the teacher said, "I'm sitting here grading papers that I think I'm just going to gag because I have to finish grading. I am so bored and turned off by reading them that I can hardly make myself finish them. And what I have just realized is that if I feel that way, I can imagine how the students must have felt about doing them." And her epiphany really was just what you said. Only when the stuff is exciting to me can it really be exciting to them. And in a way, you may have just sort of summarized in your first sentence or so kind of what my punchline to you is about differentiation. If you're expecting it to be easy, a plug-in, just hand me the book and I'll do what the book says, I don't think it can work very well. I mean, you may get a little bit of bounce out of it, but teaching's hard, and getting it better is hard work. And it means we really have to think about those kids and examine ourselves and look at our practices with understandings and see if there's any meaning in what we're doing and challenge how we work with assessment. And only as we grow will kids grow. Michael Fullen wrote a book called Breakthrough. He's the change guru, but this Breakthrough book is kind of a different one. It's about literacy, and because a lot of his work on change has been done in schools where what they were trying to change was literacy practices and student success. And so he wrote this book, and he said, in all these schools we've been in, we keep seeing that if somebody tries to make achievement go up with the scripted text or the packaged program, almost inevitably you get a bounce for a year or two in your scores, and then they level off, and then they go down again. And he uses data sets from several places to show it went up, went plateau, went down. And he said, here's what I'm coming to understand. Those scores can't continue to rise for two reasons. You're not asking the teachers to be thinkers, and you're not asking the kids to be thinkers. And only when we get better at thinking about what we're doing does the growth continue and the achievement continues. And one of his points is, if we don't make teachers excited about thinking, then that will never transfer to their kids. And any of that stuff with the fill in the blank, plug the kid into it, lets us be reasonably mindless. It's not that we're not working hard and doing stuff, but it's not really challenging our way of looking at the art of teaching and learning. And so we coast and they coast, and we all get lulled into something that's not very productive. This is harder, but boy, it enriches us as much as it enriches the kids that we have. So understandings, you're probably right. Most of us have to hatch them ourselves. Now, the national professional organizations like the National Council of Teachers of English or National Council of Teachers of Math tend on their websites to have big understandings that are authentic to the discipline. And there are now some textbooks that are really spotlighting those understandings. I don't think I'd want to pick kids up and plug them into them either. I'd want to modify them and add some stuff and see where the kids are, but it is at least a little bit of a start. But you're exactly right. It's hard to make ourselves do this. And one of the reasons is, guys, it's the same principle as a fixed mindset with kids. We look at this and we think, shoot, I've been teaching this novel for 15 years. I don't have a clue what it's about. I don't like doing this. And we just kind of want to move away from it because we don't have the ready answer. Instead of saying, you know, I may not have really thought about it this way before, but I bet you if I keep at it, I can come up with something, and I bet next year it'll be better than this year. But we want to give up because we're supposed to know all the answers. And if we don't already, maybe they're not very important anyway. And I can remember a day with that news flash going off in my head and saying to my students, you know, there's something wrong with this picture. I've been studying this novel for about 8 years. And I've gone home every time we've read it for 8 years and spent every evening working on it. And then I come back and tell you what I think is there. I don't think it makes much sense that I'm doing all the work. And at that point, I knew I somehow had to switch it back to them because it had become my novel. It wasn't theirs anymore. Yeah. I want to show you, I hope, maybe a couple of examples here, although we may just sort of make it to one. In a differentiated classroom, as I said to you before, we're going to vary the no's and do's sometimes depending on a kid's skills level and knowledge. You may have to go backwards with some kids to teach skills that are critical that they've missed. And some kids may have already learned skills that you're getting ready to teach and might be able to move on. It's the understandings that bring us back together to make community. So not only are the understandings critical because it's why individual students are willing to buy into reading, it makes them flashlight readers, but the understandings also are where we come back together and we work together as a community on something that relates to all of us. Here's one example that I want to share with you just real quickly, and if we don't have time for the second one, I'll hit it tomorrow. This is a high school, secondary teacher. I really can't remember whether she was 8th grade or 9th grade. And she said to me once when we were talking, you know, I think I went into teaching because I loved writing so much. And I wanted my students to love writing too. And she said they're really learning to hate it because all we work on is standardized test prompts. And she said, I'm trying so hard to be enthusiastic and to help them get excited about what they're doing and to give them positive feedback and to show them specifically where they can improve. But she said, I've got two groups of kids that I'm really worried about. One is a group of kids that have given up on writing. They don't think they can do it. And so she said, no matter how explicit I am or how enthusiastic I am, once they start actually doing the writing, they're drooling on the side, they're turning the paper around with their eraser, they write a few sentences or a line or two, but nothing's ever finished, and the kids aren't really investing in it because they don't believe they can do it. And she said, I'm just not getting them to be any better. And then she said, the second group that's making me really crazy is a group of kids that are very able writers. They're going to be fine on that standardized test. They're fine without me, as far as that's concerned, but the trouble is they're not growing. They just keep, their job is how fast can I finish? Can I beat everybody else finished with the paper? So she said to the kids, guys, you know, as I'm looking at your writing, it occurs to me that sometimes you all need me in different ways. And so we're going to keep doing this and this and this with our writing, several different kinds of things they were doing, like writers' workshops and that sort of thing. But she said, every once in a while, I'm going to meet with you in a small group just to kind of work on where you are with your writing. And this was her first attempt as a secondary teacher of having two groups going on in a classroom. And it was scary to her because she had not done it before. And so she might have logistically done better with 3 or 4 groups because the kids don't just split into can't and can. They're sort of in the middle and, you know, all over the place. But she didn't think she could handle more than 2 groups, and that's fine. So she said, sometimes I'm going to meet with you as a smaller group, and then some of you will be writing, and then we'll switch and I'll meet with that other group while the first group writes and so forth. And she said, we'll keep changing the groups around. And remember, this is only one of many things she's doing with the writing. So in that sense, it's not bluebirds and buzzards. It's one of many different kinds of ways she's grouping and using arrangements with the kids. Her first group of kids were kids that were the droodlers and the paper turners. And she said to them when she sat down with them, how do you all feel when we're writing the papers that we write? And she said, well, really, does it seem too big to you, too much? Do you find it boring? Do you kind of look forward to it? Is there a part of it you don't like or do like? And so she said, okay, I'll tell you what, let's start someplace that's a little different. Sometimes when I have to write something, if I can't relate to it, if I don't see the point of it, I can't get very excited about writing. So here's what I want to do. She said, I want you to take whatever the prompt is from the state and to make sure that you relate that to your life somehow. So she said, let me give you an example. Here's the prompt we're working with today. And if I just look at that, I don't find it too interesting. But if I really think, can I connect with that? Then that reminds me of a time when I was a kid and my brother and I did so-and-so. And now I'm sort of interested in that prompt because that story reminds me of something and I feel like I've got something to write. What do you think about that? And the kids went. She said, okay, how do you make this prompt a hot topic? What's something that can, in your life, that can make this really exciting for you? And the kids went. And she said, okay, let me give you another illustration. Remember the story we read earlier in the year about so-and-so? Well, I kind of see this idea in the prompt in that story because of so-and-so. Do you see what I'm saying? And the kids went. And she said, if you thought of that, would it make it easier for you to write the prompt or not? She said, okay, now you do it. Here's the prompt. You give me a hot topic, a way to connect it. And they went. And she said, we did that for about 5 meetings. And every time she gave them an idea, they could see it. And when she asked them for one, they had nothing. And she said about 5 or 6 weeks into that, a boy said, that kind of reminds me of a time me and my friend did so-and-so. And she said, I almost leapt across the circle to kiss him because he had finally made that breakthrough. And the other kids could see one of themselves doing it. And she said, Carol, I never would have gotten there in front of the whole class because I didn't realize that those kids thought writing was a skill that was totally apart from their lives. They thought it was mystery meat, and some kids have that skill and some don't. They had no sense that their own lives were the fodder for writing. So that got them one step. Second step then, when they'd choose a hot topic, she'd get them to brainstorm, what are all the things we could say about that topic? And the reason she did that is because kids who aren't fluent can't write. And kids who don't write aren't fluent. So she's pushing them for fluency. Let's come up with a whole bunch of ideas together that could go in there. Then once she had done that, she would say to the kids, okay, let's develop a word bank. What are some adjectives, some adverbs, some verbs that are strong that might go with this topic? And she said, I was doing that because they have trouble with spelling and they can't think of the right word. So I thought if we thought of some ourselves and had them up there, then they could refer to that. What do you suppose her next insight was? Give me a list of adjectives. Give me a list of verbs that would go well here. No clue what an adjective or a verb was, and she didn't know that when she was just talking to the whole class. So they got better at that, but they also began to understand over time what those were. And then she would say, okay, guys, we won't use all 15 of these ideas you had. What are the ones that are the most important? Which ones are the ones that really push it forward? That gave them some practice in what is essential and what's not. And she would get them to put them in what she calls storyboards. This is a big idea we should write about. This is a big idea that we should write about, and so forth. And then she'd say to the kids, so are they in the right order now? Is this the first one we need to write about, or is this the first one we need to write about? And they'd decide that and number them. And then she said, okay, now we can't just write 4 ideas down and go home because you'll have 4 sentences. It'll be a pretty scrawny paper and we won't know what you think. So what are the ideas that are going to support this big idea? What are you going to say first and second and third to help us see what you're thinking about this idea? And she called these support ladders. And she built the support ladders with the kids one step at a time. And for the first time, she said, the kids in that group understood the idea of a topic sentence and supporting details. Do you suppose nobody had ever taught that to them in 8 years? It had been taught to them 100 times. Why do you suppose they got it now? Part of it's visual. You can see the ladder leading up there. First time anybody taught them without the textbook or without the words, she showed them. And they put it together. And furthermore, she's sitting in a small group so she can look eyeball to eyeball at them. And they're not lost in the back of the room or on the side of the room like they'd like to be. So then she would say to these kids, okay, you've got a hot topic, some possible ideas, an organization. Let me get you to go begin writing now. She did an important thing here. She said you can either choose the hot topic and the storyboards we developed as a group, or if you'd rather do one on your own, that's okay too. And that's important because she's got some kids in that group who are dead in the water and some who could generate one on their own if they wanted to. Then this group has been working alone or in pairs to develop a topic based on the prompt. And she asked them to make a bank of power ideas. And here's how she did that. She said to the kids, guys, the first time they met, I want to tell you 2 things about your writing from my perspective, and I want you to see if you agree with me. First thing is you're all competent writers, and unless you decide to go to sleep, I believe every one of you will pass the state writing test. Anybody in the group disagree with me? And all the kids went, because they know. Said, okay, that's the first thing. Here's the second thing I want to tell you about your writing. it's incredibly boring. And these are kids who are good achievers, so they're going. And she said, let me tell you what happens. I read a piece of your writing and I think, that's okay. And then I read the second piece and it says exactly what the first piece said. And then I read the third piece and it says exactly what the first two said. By the time I get to the sixth one, I'm really feeling violent. And she said, when you start to write, I don't want you anymore just to write down the first thing that comes to your mind and see how fast you can finish. Before you start, I want you to make a bank of power ideas. Here's a way I could approach this that would blow people's socks off. Here's a way that I could come at this that would really evoke curiosity in people. And so then she got them to work with her on ratcheting. This is a different skill set. How does an author invite people in with the beginning? What kinds of transitions are the authors using here? What are ways that people set up paradoxes in their writing? What sorts of content clues are these guys setting? It's a very advanced set of writing skills compared to this, but it's what it's going to take to make these guys move forward. And so she kept on with that, moving some kids between the groups and always interspersing writer's workshop and whole class stuff and paired sharing and that sort of thing. This was her real pride and joy and why she started telling me this to start with. She said, here's what I figured out. If I sit in the front of the room on a stool that's about this high, and the kids that I'm meeting with are sitting at my feet facing me, that means their backs are to the back of the room and they can't see what's going on behind them. But because I'm on this stool, I can see over them and I can see the kids who are in the desk back here writing and I can monitor what they're doing. And then she also said to the kids, when you're writing, guys, I have kind of weak concentration. And if you all are talking with each other back here, you may be right on target, but I have trouble concentrating. So I'm going to ask you when I'm meeting with the group in the front of the room and you're writing, not to talk and not to sit next to anybody, because that'll keep you from talking and it'll help me be a better teacher. So mostly they spread out and that was great. This was wonderful to her because she was targeting their needs, but this is what saved her. She figured out how to manage it and she was able to do that. This is a place where you can integrate meaning and skills on the level of the kids and be able to get to where they need, not sacrifice the skills, not sacrifice the meaning, but still be able to manage what you need to do. So those are a couple of examples, or an example, and then tomorrow we'll look at another one real quickly.
As Dr. Tomlinson illustrated, effectively differentiating literacy instruction results in lessons that engage students and make them want to learn. In the next program, Dr. Tomlinson will present more examples of how teachers differentiate their literacy instruction.